The phone rang just after 8 that night, a quiet November drizzle sliding down the kitchen window. I was still staring at my laptop, finishing invoices for clients when the name Mom lit up the screen. I almost smiled before I picked up, but her voice wasn't warm. It was steady, almost rehearsed. "Lauren," she said, "we all agreed you're not invited to Thanksgiving this year." That was it. No pause, no hesitation, no reason. Just a statement followed by silence so heavy, I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. "Wait, what?" I managed. "Is something wrong?" Her sigh was faint, tired. "There's been tension. It's better this way." Then the line went dead. I sat there with the phone still against my ear. Outside, the rain softened against the glass, and the light from my monitor flickered across the kitchen counter. For a long moment, I didn't move. My thumb hovered above the call log, but I didn't call back. I didn't text. I just set the phone down and opened a new browser tab, muscle memory, more than thought. My cursor clicked automatically on the Mitchell family savings account. The balance blinked at the top $950,000. The number looked calm and different. I stared at it like it could explain what had just happened. My pulse steadied, cold clarity replacing the sting. If they could erase me from their holiday table, I could erase the comfort they built on my back. The apartment was still except for the soft ticking of the clock. I leaned back in my chair and tried to understand when things had started to shift. It wasn't sudden. It never is. The distance had been creeping in like frost on a window, slow and visible until you finally can't see through it anymore. I used to drive up to Seattle every year without fail. No matter how busy work got, no matter how bad the traffic was, I'd bake pies, bring wine, pay for the turkey, because Dad forgot to order one again. I thought that's what family did, pick up the pieces quietly, so the picture stayed whole. But that night, sitting in my small apartment 200 miles south, I realized I'd been the only one patching the cracks. I opened my email out of habit, searching for the annual Thanksgiving thread. There was nothing. No "who's bringing the stuffing," no "remember to thaw the bird this time," just silence. When I clicked the folder labeled Turkey Time, a red banner flashed across the top, "Access denied." My stomach dropped. I refreshed, tried again. The same message. It wasn't a glitch. Someone had removed me. I checked the family drive we'd used for years, where I kept the budgets, the spreadsheets, the bills. All of it gone. Or rather, still there but locked behind permissions that no longer included me. The next message came through an hour later. "Ryan. My brother. The golden one. Don't make this awkward," he wrote. "Mom and Dad just want peace this year. Peace." That word settled like a stone in my throat. I read it again and again until the letters blurred. Then I set the phone face down. My apartment felt smaller after that. The walls closer, the air colder. I stood by the window looking out at the dark street below. Across the way, a couple was stringing lights along their balcony, laughter spilling into the night. For a moment, I envied their ease, their warmth. Mine had been measured in duty for years. I thought of the last Thanksgiving I'd attended. I'd driven up after work late as usual, the trunk full of groceries I'd bought myself. When I walked in, the table was already set, every seat taken. Ryan looked up from carving the turkey and grinned without humor. Look who decided to show up. Nobody offered to make space. I ended up at the counter with a paper plate, pretending not to notice when my mother avoided meeting my eyes. I told myself it was stress, that families said things they didn't mean during holidays. But now, remembering her voice on the phone, I knew better. It hadn't been stress, it had been planning. The clock on the wall blinked 10. I poured a cup of coffee just to have something to do. The bitter smell filled the air, grounding me. When I glanced at my laptop again, the savings account was still open. I'd started that account 6 years ago, back when Dad's company hit a rough patch. They'd needed a cushion for emergencies. I'd transferred my bonus, my savings, even some of my retirement. Over time it grew. Everyone called it the family fund. But every login, every password, every wire went through me. Because I was the organized one. I took a sip of coffee watching the steam curl. $950,000. Mortgage, house maintenance, the shared credit line for family expenses, all of it flowed through that one hub. I had never questioned it. I was proud in a way. Keeping things stable made me feel useful. Loved, maybe. But now, the number on the screen didn't feel like security. It felt like leverage. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "Don't overthink it," Ryan wrote. "You make things tense. Just let it go." My fingers tightened around the mug until the ceramic burned my palm. I typed one word, then erased it, typed another, then deleted the whole thing. I wasn't going to defend myself in a family that had already rendered its verdict. The apartment was silent again. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city damp and reflective. Streetlights cast long glows across the pavement. I watched a delivery driver carry boxes into the building next door. Life went on indifferent. I closed the banking tab, but the image of that number lingered in my mind. It wasn't revenge, I felt, at least not yet. It was something steadier. A realization that the quiet person holding all the threads could also be the one who decided when to cut them. The next morning, I woke early. The world outside was gray, the air sharp with the scent of wet pine. My coffee machine sputtered to life, the sound oddly loud in the stillness. I scrolled through my emails, half expecting anyone to have written. Nothing. No apologies, no clarifications. Just a promotional flyer from the airline I used to book flights north every November. The subject line read, "Ready for your next family getaway." I almost laughed. I opened my phone and listened to my mother's voicemail again, letting each word carve itself deeper. "We all agreed you're not invited. No warmth, no regret. Just bureaucracy disguised as family." I saved the message, labeling it proof. Not because I planned to show it to anyone, but because I needed to see it to remind myself it had really happened. The rest of the day I moved through work like a machine. Numbers, reports, transfers, routine that kept me from thinking too much. But every time my screen dimmed, I saw the reflection of my own face in the black glass. Calm. Controlled. The kind of calm that comes right before a decision. When night fell again, I sat back at my kitchen table. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. For years, I'd been the invisible scaffolding of this family, the one who made everything work, who smoothed over every rough edge. They didn't invite me to Thanksgiving because they thought they didn't need me. That was their mistake. I opened a new folder on my desktop and typed 2 words into the title bar: frozen accounts. The screen glowed pale in the dark room. I saved it, closed the laptop, and stared at the window where my reflection stared back. My phone buzzed once more, another message from Ryan. "Hope you're not planning to make a scene. Let's keep things calm." I let the screen fade, then whispered into the quiet. "If calm is what you want, little brother, calm is exactly what you'll get." Outside, the rain started again, soft, persistent cleansing. Inside, I exhaled, slow and deliberate. Whatever peace they thought they'd won by excluding me, I was about to teach them what real silence could do. The next morning, my email inbox greeted me with a subject line that stopped me mid-sip of coffee: quarterly family fund summary. For a second, I thought about deleting it without opening, but the words family fund hit like a bruise I hadn't touched yet. I clicked. The balance stared back, $950,000, clean, round, and silent. The spreadsheet was attached, columns neat, my formatting from years ago still there. At the bottom it said, "Prepared by LM," my initials. It pulled me straight into memory, back to the night I first created it. 6 years earlier, my parents had invited me up for dinner at their house in Seattle. I remember the smell of roast chicken, the clink of wine glasses, the way the conversation turned casual before it curved into something else. Dad had just retired early from his logistics job, claiming he wanted to breathe again. Mom had started volunteering at her charity board, and Ryan, freshly married to Madison, was talking about buying a house in the suburbs. Money, as usual, was the quiet shadow at the table. Dad cleared his throat. "You're good with numbers, Lo. We were thinking maybe you could help us set up a family savings pool." Just for emergencies or when things get tight? Mom smiled too bright. You've always had such a steady head. We'd all contribute a little. You'd just manage it. I should have heard the subtle shift in her voice the way help meant take over. But I didn't. I said sure. I spent that weekend setting up the account, transferring my own savings to start it. They added some. Ryan chipped in a bit from his bonus. We called it the family fund. It felt like trust back then. It felt like love, disguised as spreadsheets and totals. Months later, the first favor arrived. Dad's property taxes were due, and he said the fund could temporarily cover it. I transferred the payment, promising myself I'd log it properly. Then came the mortgage, the home insurance, a car repair. Each time it was just this once. Each time they forgot to pay it back. I kept records because that's what I did, kept order where there was chaos. But I didn't realize order could also mean chains. By the second year, I was paying nearly everything connected to that house. The gas, the electric, even the Wi-Fi. I had all the bills on autopay because Mom said she couldn't figure out those online portals. Every time I offered to walk her through it, she'd laugh softly. You're so much faster at this than me, honey. I'd just mess it up. The first Thanksgiving after I started managing everything, Ryan arrived in a brand new car boasting about the interest rate he'd gotten. Mom beamed. Your brother's doing so well, Lauren. Maybe you should let him give you advice for once. I smiled, said nothing, and tried not to think about the $7,000 wire transfer I'd approved for his down payment 2 weeks earlier. Later that night, while clearing dishes, Madison caught me in the kitchen. Ryan told me you've been amazing with the finances, she said sweetly. It must feel good to take care of everyone. I remember forcing a laugh. Yeah, feels great. The truth was it didn't. It felt heavy, like holding a structure everyone else pretended was self-sustaining. One spring, Ryan called asking to withdraw $120,000 from the fund. We're remodeling, he said, adding value to the family asset. Ryan, that's the house fund, I reminded him. So, you're the manager, not the owner. His tone was casual but sharp. I started to protest, but Mom took the phone. Sweetheart, let him. It's for all of us. You're just better with paperwork, that's all. That phrase, better with paperwork, would echo for years. It meant you do the labor, we reap the comfort. I processed the transaction anyway. Weeks later, I saw the receipt from a real estate agency. Down payment, not renovation. I didn't mention it again. I told myself it wasn't worth starting a fight. Family peace cost something, I thought. Turns out it cost exactly $120,000. Over time, they stopped thanking me entirely. They expected the payments like oxygen, unseen but necessary. When I'd visit, Mom would hand me envelopes of utility bills, as if I were the clerk behind a service counter. Can you just handle these online, darling, she'd say, already walking away. At first, I told myself I was being too sensitive. That's what they always said when I pointed out the imbalance. You're too emotional, Lauren, Mom would sigh. Ryan has more stress than you, he's starting a family. I didn't say that the stress of holding everyone's financial world in place without acknowledgement could crush a person too. The breaking point came 2 years ago, though I didn't see it then. It was Ryan's birthday dinner. They'd rented a private dining room downtown, the kind with gold trim and waiters who never stop refilling your glass. I'd arranged the catering, paid the deposit through the family credit line, and driven 3 hours to get there. Halfway through dessert, Dad raised his glass and toasted to Ryan for keeping this family afloat. Everyone clapped. My chest tightened so hard I had to excuse myself to the restroom. I remember standing in front of the mirror, lipstick, smudged palms, damp, whispering, "You're invisible." Then I smiled at my own reflection because invisibility, I realized, had its uses. That thought drifted back to me, now sitting in my apartment with the family fund summary open on my laptop. I scrolled down through the contribution chart. My name filled nearly every line: $3, $000, $5, $500, $8, $200. Mom's occasional deposits under miscellaneous. Ryan's sparse, irregular. At the bottom, a pie chart showed the breakdown, 87% from me. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. I opened a new tab and pulled up the mortgage documents. My name wasn't on the deed, only on the payment schedule. It hit me like cold water, all the things I'd kept alive I didn't even own. I sat back, staring at the ceiling, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The guilt I used to feel about saying no began to unravel, replaced by something calmer, heavier. Proof. That's what I needed. Proof that what they called help had been exploitation. I reached for my notebook, the one I kept hidden in the drawer under my tax files, and flipped to a blank page. I wrote mortgage, $1,980 divided by month. Paid by me since June 2018 property tax. 4 payments per year. Me. Utilities. Auto pay under my account. Family credit line. Sole guarantor L. Mitchell. Each line steadied me a ledger of reality. Numbers don't lie even when people do. I pulled up the folder I'd created the night before frozen accounts. It waited on the desktop like a quiet door. I dragged the spreadsheet inside and renamed it Phase 1. My hand didn't shake. Outside traffic hummed softly on the wet street tires hissing on pavement. I could almost see the Seattle skyline in my mind, their big house, the string lights Ryan hung every year across the porch. They were probably already decorating, talking about the menu, pretending nothing was wrong. For years, I had been the scaffolding holding them upright, unseen and unthanked. They had built comfort on my balance sheets. They had built warmth on my restraint. And now, with one phone call, they decided I didn't belong at their table. I glanced back at the spreadsheet. The numbers stared back, obedient and unfeeling. They didn't care who used them, they only followed orders. Fine, I thought. Let's give them new orders. I highlighted the first row and typed a note in the comments box. Everything they took for granted, I will take back quietly. Then I saved the file, the faint click echoing in the still apartment. The day faded toward evening. Light leaked pale and gray across the countertop. I made myself another coffee, strong and bitter, and watched the steam rise. Somewhere between one breath and the next, I realized the shift was complete. The guilt was gone. The warmth gone, too. What was left was something cleaner. Control. And that, I thought, was finally mine. The next morning, I opened my laptop expecting the usual hum of work emails, but instead a small red banner flashed across the top of the screen, password reset requested. My stomach tightened. I hadn't changed a thing. I tried to log in again, same message. When I opened the shared family drive, the one I'd built and managed for years, another alert appeared. ACCSS denied. At first, I thought it was a system error. I refreshed the page, cleared my cache, even rebooted the router. Nothing. I typed the password slower this time, as if the system might respond to calm hands. It didn't. The message stayed bright and final. I tried the secondary email, the old one I'd used to create the Mitchell Family Fund account 6 years ago. Locked. The bank's login portal showed my username, but no longer recognized my credentials. Every digital door I had ever built for this family was now bolted from the inside. The silence around me thickened louder than any alarm. I reached for my phone and called Mom. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Still nothing. I dialed Dad, though he rarely answered anyway. The call rang twice and cut off. Then I tried Ryan. His voicemail started with the same smug tone I remembered. Hey, this is Ryan. Leave it if it's important. I hung up before the beep. Fine. If they didn't want to speak, I'd check the group chat. The one we used every year, Thanksgiving Plan 2025. The screen blinked gray for a moment before the words appeared. You have been removed from this conversation. I stared at it for a long time, the edges of my vision blurring. The absurdity made me almost laugh. My entire family had turned me into a ghost, digitally and literally. The thought rolled through my chest like a quiet wave. They didn't just uninvite me. They're erasing me one login at a time. I tried one last route. The shared email inbox for utilities, something I'd created so everyone could track payments. When I typed in the address, a new name appeared beside it, owner Helen M. The timestamp showed the change was made 2 days ago. 2 days before my mother called to say I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. This wasn't an accident, it was choreography. I opened the banking app. At the top under primary contact, the name had been changed from mine to Ryan Mitchell. I clicked on recent changes and saw a request dated the previous afternoon. He'd done it while I was still reeling from the phone call. The pattern was so deliberate, it almost felt professional, like a hostile takeover, except the company was my life. I took a slow breath, forcing my hands steady, and started taking screenshots. Every alert, every modification, every denial notice. I created a new folder on my desktop. Proof 1. Access log. One by one, I saved the files, labeling them by date and time. The sound of each screenshot felt like a small hammer striking metal. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair. The morning light slanted through the blinds, striping the table with pale lines. I could feel my pulse slow, not from calm exactly, but from clarity. They hadn't just locked me out, they'd been planning this. I thought back to the early years when that same drive was filled with cheerful chaos. Photos of our dinners, shared recipes, even playlists for the long drives north. Mom used to upload pictures of pies and send captions like, "Look what your brother helped me make, though he never did." I remembered Ryan's voice teasing once at Christmas, "You and your spreadsheets, Lauren. You'll probably marry Excel one day." At the time I laughed. Now the memory felt hollow, like laughter echoing down an empty hall. The hum of my computer fan filled the silence. I opened a blank note and started listing what I'd lost. Access to the drive, access to the fund email, bank portal permissions, group chat removal. Every bullet point looked clinical, detached, but each one carried a bruise beneath it. Around noon, I tried one last time to reach out, sending a message directly to Ryan. I noticed some changes in the accounts. "If you or Mom need clarification, just let me know." No reply. The message stayed delivered, unread. Half an hour later, another notification buzzed. I expected it to be him, but it was Madison. Her text read, "Maybe this is for the best. Families need less tension during the holidays. Less tension." I stared at the phrase, letting it sink in. It was the same kind of careful cruelty. She'd perfected words that sounded polite but stripped of empathy. I could almost picture her typing it with that distant smile she always wore, the one that said she believed she was better. I saved the text as a screenshot, dropped it into a new folder titled Proof 2. Messages. By evening, the air in my apartment had cooled and the city outside was fading into a wash of streetlights. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop, opened, the screen dimmed to a soft glow. For years, this family had run on my systems, my organization, my structure, my discipline. I had been the invisible grid that kept them afloat, and now they were trying to rewrite it, to take ownership of something they didn't even understand. I closed my eyes and saw their faces at Thanksgiving, years of them sitting around the long oak table while I stood at the counter refilling glasses. I'd been the background fixture, the one who cleaned up the mess. That's what they wanted me to remain, a utility. Something useful until it wasn't convenient. The email pinged just as I opened my eyes. The sender's name made my breath hitch. Evergreen Bank. Account notification. The subject line, primary account, holder change request, confirmed. Confirmed. The word pulsed against the screen, sharp as glass. Someone had actually tried to transfer control of the entire family account, and the bank had processed it. My body went still. Then I scrolled down and saw the note. "If you did not authorize this change, please contact your branch representative immediately." I clicked the download PDF option and saved it to my growing archive. The evidence folder now felt like a heartbeat on my desktop, steady, undeniable. Outside rain began tapping against the windows, soft but relentless. I stared into it, the city lights blurred into streaks. I could almost see my family's house 200 miles north, the string lights Ryan always hung early, the smell of turkey and cinnamon that used to mean home. I thought of Mom sitting at her kitchen counter, perfectly composed, probably telling anyone who asked that I was taking space. The lie rolled easily off her tongue, I knew. She'd spent her whole life editing reality to suit the family image. I took another screenshot this time of the bank's confirmation page and added it to the folder. Then I renamed the folder itself Phase 2, Proof of Erasure. There was no anger, not anymore, just precision. The kind of focus that accountants use when balancing columns, everything aligning perfectly. I closed my laptop, the sound echoing through the quiet apartment. My phone buzzed once more. This time it was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Lauren Mitchell, a male voice asked. Yes, this is Mark from Evergreen Bank. We noticed a recent ownership change request on your shared account. It was initiated by Ryan Mitchell and Helen Mitchell. Do you confirm that authorization? My throat felt tight, but my voice came out steady. No, I did not authorize that. He exhaled softly, typing something. All right, Miss Mitchell. Then I'll mark this as a contested change. The account will be temporarily frozen for review. The word frozen landed heavy in my chest, strange and fitting all at once. When I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The rain distorted it slightly, breaking my features into fragments of light and shadow. I whispered to no one. If they wanted me gone, they're about to find out what gone really feels like. I opened the laptop again just long enough to add one more note beneath the others. If peace means erasing me, I'll show them the cost of absence. Then I shut the computer, turned off the light, and let the storm outside drown the last of the silence. The morning came quiet and gray, a fine mist hanging over Portland like the city. Hadn't decided whether to wake up yet. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and rain. When I opened my laptop, the first thing I saw was an email from Evergreen Bank. The subject line read, Temporary freeze initiated. I clicked it open. The message was short, polite, sterile. Your account has been placed under review and will remain frozen pending verification by the primary holder. I read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't feel like punishment anymore. They felt like alignment. I sat back in my chair and let the sentence linger in my head. Freeze initiated. They had locked me out of Thanksgiving. I would lock them out of everything else. I reached for my notebook, the one with the worn leather cover, and flipped to a blank page. The paper still smelled like ink and quiet resolve. I wrote a title at the top in neat capital letters, Operation Silence. Below it, I began to list each account I managed. Mortgage, property tax escrow, electric, gas, internet, family savings fund $950,000, family credit line. I drew a small box beside each one. Check marks would come later. The list stretched down the page like the blueprint of a house one I had built, without realizing how easily it could be taken for granted. For years, they had treated my organization as background noise, the invisible hum that kept their lives running. You're so good at this, Lauren, Mom used to say whenever I handled a new bill. I used to think that was praise. Now I understood it was comfort, a way to keep me doing what none of them wanted to think about. I took a long sip of coffee and stared at the first line. Mortgage. The house they lived in, the one I paid for month after month while they toasted around the dinner table. Outside, the rain gathered into thin trails on the glass, threading down like faint veins of light. Inside, the room was still the only sound, the faint hum of the fridge. I opened my laptop and logged into the mortgage portal. My name, L. Mitchell, appeared at the top. I clicked Manage Account. A drop-down box offered several options. My cursor hovered over one pause payment. A confirmation window popped up. Are you sure you want to suspend all automatic drafts? I stared at it for a long breath. Then I clicked yes. The button turned gray. A small green checkmark appeared, request processed. That was it. No fanfare, no fireworks. Just a quiet shift in power, invisible to anyone but me. I opened the next tab, the electric company. The same process. Login, manage, suspend service. Another confirmation. Another screenshot saved into my proof. 3. execution folder, gas, internet, property tax. Each one fell like a domino, slow and deliberate. Every click steadied me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was precision, like balancing a column that had been uneven for too long. While waiting for one of the confirmation emails, my mind drifted to a conversation from last spring. Ryan had been bragging at dinner about how the bills practically pay themselves. Mom had laughed, saying, "Lauren's systems are a blessing. It's like the house runs on autopilot." They never realized autopilot had a pilot. I smiled faintly, not with bitterness, but with understanding. They had called me cold before. Maybe they were right. Cold was reliable. Cold didn't waver. Cold was steady enough to shut off the lights. The first confirmation email arrived. I clicked it open. Effective November 27, electric service will be suspended pending payment. Thanksgiving Eve. Perfect. I added the note to my list, drawing a red checkmark next to electric. The next email followed gas service, scheduled for disconnection November 2, 86:00 a.m. Another check. I worked through each system until the column of empty boxes was filled. Each checkmark was a sentence in a language my family had never learned to read. The last step was the savings fund, the heart of everything. The balance glowed on the screen like it had the first day I set it up, $950,000. I hovered over the suspend access button. My reflection shimmered faintly on the monitor, eyes calm, jaw tight. "Are you sure you want to freeze this account?" the prompt asked. "Yes," I whispered, though the system didn't need to hear me. The confirmation box blinked, account frozen. My chest rose, then steadied. The silence that followed was the cleanest I'd ever heard. I saved the confirmation page and dropped it into the folder with the rest. My desktop was now a digital graveyard of proofs, each file named like evidence, each time-stamped with my quiet signature. When I closed the laptop, the reflection on the black screen caught my face, half lit by the gray morning. I barely recognized the calm there. It wasn't satisfaction, not even revenge exactly. It was something simpler, equilibrium. The phone buzzed beside me. A new message from the bank. I opened it. "Please note, all related debit cards will be temporarily deactivated within 48 hours. I sat back, the corners of my mouth lifting just slightly. Perfect timing. They'd start noticing soon. Maybe when they went to buy groceries. Maybe when they tried to pay the caterer. Maybe when the house went dark. I got up and poured myself another cup of coffee. The steam curled upward, catching the morning light. For once, the bitter taste didn't bother me. It reminded me I was awake. As I set the mug down, another sound cut through the quiet, a soft ping from my computer. Another email. I glanced at the subject line, confirmation autopay canceled, Mitchell household mortgage. My heart didn't even race this time. Just another line checked off. I opened the notebook again, flipping to the list. Every box was marked, every account sealed. Underneath it, in smaller handwriting, I added one final line, Thanksgiving blackout, complete by 6:00 p.m. Outside, the drizzle thickened into rain. I watched it streak down the window, each drop splitting and running its course. It looked like cleansing more than storm. I reached over, turned off the lamp, and let the gray light fill the room. The silence felt heavier but not uncomfortable. It was the kind that comes after finishing something long overdue. My phone buzzed once more. A new message from Evergreen Bank, automatic and impersonal action completed. Account status frozen. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the word until it blurred slightly. The heater clicked on in the background, humming softly. I thought about that house in Seattle, the one I had kept warm for years, and how quiet it would sound without power humming through the walls. They wanted peace without me, I murmured, lifting the coffee mug again. Let's see how peaceful a dark house feels. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again, marking the quiet march toward Thanksgiving. I saved the final file, closed the laptop, and stood at the window watching the rain wash the world clean. The city lights flickered faintly in the distance, reflections breaking against wet pavement. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one left out. I felt like the one holding the switch. 2 days passed before the silence cracked. It started with a vibration against the counter, a sound small enough to ignore until it wouldn't stop. My phone lit up with a flood of messages, first from Ryan. "We need to talk. Something's wrong with the bank." Then another. "Mom says all her cards are getting declined." "What did you do?" I didn't reply. I didn't even open the thread. I just took a screenshot and dropped it into a new folder on my desktop titled Proof 4 Reactions. The sound of the screenshot ping was oddly satisfying. A few minutes later, another message arrived. This one from Mom. "Lauren, please fix whatever you did. People are calling about bills." I don't know what's happening. The choice of words made me pause. Fix whatever you did. Not can you help or we're confused. No, always a demand dressed up as concern. I poured coffee and let the steam blur my reflection in the window. Outside the city was gray again. Inside I played back her voicemail. Her voice trembled just enough to sound human. "Lauren, honey, there's a mix-up with the payments. We can't reach the utility company and your father's card isn't working. Could you please call them?" A pause. A breath. Then softer. "We need you to handle this. You always do." The message ended with the sound of her exhale, long and weary. The next voicemail came seconds later, Ryan this time. His tone was sharp. "You've gone too far. You can't just freeze accounts that aren't yours. Mom's losing it. Call me back before you make this worse." I smiled, a small curl of irony. Accounts that aren't mine. Every one of them was under my name. I didn't respond. Instead, I created a subfolder, voicemails. 3 files so far. The phone kept buzzing for hours. Texts, missed calls, emails titled urgent. I ignored them all. The sound became background noise, like the ticking of a clock you stop hearing after a while. By late afternoon, the messages had slowed the panic, shifting into silence again. I sat on the couch, phone face down, laptop open, watching the cursor blink on an empty screen. Then an email appeared. No sender name, just a random string of letters. The subject line read, "You should hear this before they delete it." For a long moment, I didn't move. Then curiosity pushed past caution. I clicked. There was a single attachment, dinner, MP3. I put on my headphones and pressed play. At first, all I heard was clinking silverware, laughter, the low murmur of conversation. Then came Mom's voice, smooth and controlled as ever. "She's always been distant," she said. "Cold. Convenient when we need her, but not really family." Laughter followed Ryan's sharp, Madison's soft and agreeing. "She likes control," Ryan said. "This is better. She'll finally learn to let go." Another voice, Dad, barely audible. "Don't stir it up, son. Just let it settle." Madison again, lighter, almost cheerful. "She should be thankful we're keeping the peace." The last sound was Mom's voice, faint but clear. "We'll change the accounts tomorrow." The recording ended with the scrape of a chair and the soft click of glass against glass. I sat very still. The apartment was silent except for the faint buzz in my ears. I replayed the file once, then twice. Each time the words cut cleaner. Cold. Convenient. Not really family. I took the headphones off and let them rest on the table. My hands were steady, but my throat felt tight. For years, I had suspected they talked about me like that, half pity, half condescension, but hearing it out loud stripped away the last of my denial. It wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It was contempt dressed in family dinnerware. I opened a blank document and typed one sentence. "They call it peace. I call it proof." The words looked simple on the screen, but they carried a weight that felt like air clearing after a storm. A tear slid down before I realized it, quick and hot. I wiped it away. Not sadness, exactly, more like release. I saved the audio file into a new folder, Proof 5, Recording. Then I renamed the document beside it, Statement of Facts. I added a line beneath it. Audio recording dated November 20, location, Mitchell residence. Participants Helen Robert Ryan Madison. Subject justification for exclusion of Lauren. Evidence catalog not emotion. My phone buzzed again. I checked it out of habit. Another text from Ryan Moms crying. The power company says the account holder shut off service. Please answer. I could almost hear the panic between the words. I didn't reply. Instead, I took another screenshot and added it to the folder. The rain started again outside, tapping against the glass. I sat there listening, one rhythm blending into another, the weather, the pings of new messages, the occasional voicemail tone. I poured another cup of coffee, black and bitter, and watched steam coil upward. When I glanced at the phone again, a new voicemail notification appeared. I didn't press play this time. I just saved it. Voicemail 4. MP3. I began building a table in Excel. Voicemails 4. Text messages 8. Bank notices 5. Audio, evidence 1. Total 18 pieces of proof. I sat back staring at the list. Every file, every voice, every message, they'd all built their case for me. I didn't need to scream or argue. Their words were enough. I drafted an email to David Miller, the attorney I'd worked with years ago during a contract dispute. The subject line read private matter, family accounts. I started typing a summary, dates, ownership, recorded conversations, but before I hit send, I stopped. Not yet. Timing mattered. I saved it as a draft and closed the window. The city outside was glowing now, reflections from streetlights smearing gold across the wet pavement. Across the way, a neighbor's window flickered with the light of a TV. A family sitcom, laughter faint through the rain. I wondered if those people had any idea how lucky they were to have a peace that didn't need freezing to be earned. My phone buzzed one last time that night. It was an email from an unknown sender, probably the same one who sent the recording. The subject line was a single word, "They're meeting again." There was no attachment, no body text, just those words. I stared at it, then at the growing list of evidence on my screen. My name, my handwriting, their voices. Proof of every truth they had buried under years of politeness. I shut the laptop and leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes. The sound of rain deepened, steady and soft. In my mind, I saw their dining room again, the same one where that recording was made. The chandelier glinting above their heads. My mother's perfect posture. Ryan's self-satisfied grin. Madison's empty laughter. They thought they'd erased me, but they'd forgotten one thing: I had built the system that kept their world turning. Every file, every password, every transaction, it all started with me. I whispered into the quiet, "You wanted peace. You just never asked what it would cost." The rain eased to a drizzle. I opened my eyes, watching the city lights blur into soft halos against the glass. My laptop screen dimmed on its own, the folder of evidence glowing faintly before fading to black. "They thought they'd silenced me," I said, my voice low and certain. "But the proof they left behind is louder than anything I'll ever say." The morning unfolded in a haze of soft fog and quiet resolve. Portland looked muted outside my window, the kind of still gray that made sound travel slower. My inbox was the opposite, noisy, flashing with new subject lines that stacked over each other like panic. Urgent account access denied. Call me back now. Unauthorized freeze investigation notice. I scrolled slowly, half a sip of coffee hovering at my lips. The one from the bank caught my eye. I opened it. "Dear Miss Mitchell, your request to freeze and review associated accounts has been received and verified. Please note only the registered account holder may modify or reinstate access." There it was, plain, legal, airtight. I read it twice, then smiled. For days they had accused me of acting impulsively, emotionally. But everything I'd done was precise, documented. I wasn't the problem. I was the protocol. I opened my phone contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't used in years: David Miller. I'd met him back when I was a contract accountant at a construction firm. He was steady, pragmatic, the kind of man who read fine print like it was poetry. When he answered, his voice was still the same brisk but calm. "Lauren, it's been a while." "Hi, David," I said. "I need legal clarity. Tell me everything." I gave him the short version. The shared family fund. My name on every account. Their attempt to transfer ownership. The freeze. The backlash. He didn't interrupt, only the faint scratch of his pen filling the pauses. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. "Lauren," he said, "finally, every account you mentioned, mortgage, utilities, savings, are registered under your name. Yes, all of them. Then you hold full legal authority. Freezing the accounts wasn't retaliation. It was self-protection. They can't touch a cent without your written consent." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "They're claiming I overstepped." He chuckled low and even. "You didn't overstep. You built the step. If they push legal action, they'll embarrass themselves." The relief that spread through me wasn't loud, it was subtle, like warmth creeping back into cold fingers. "Do you have proof of their attempt to seize control?" he asked. "I have everything," I said. "Emails, voicemails, screenshots, even a recording of them planning to change the accounts." He paused, impressed. "Then you've built the cleanest paper trail I've ever seen. Keep it organized, time-stamped, untouched. You're standing on solid ground." I thanked him and ended the call, my hands still resting on the phone. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel hunted. I felt anchored. Everything I had done wasn't a strike back. It was a retraction, a quiet undoing of years of unreciprocated loyalty. They called it control. I called it survival. I sipped my coffee, now gone lukewarm, and watched the fog outside begin to lift. My phone vibrated again. A flood of new messages, each one more frantic than the last. From Ryan, "We talked to a lawyer. He says you can't do this. We're coming after you if you don't fix it." From Mom, "People are calling. The bank is asking questions. My charity partners are furious." From Madison, "You're ruining the family name. Please stop before this gets out of hand." I scrolled through them all, saving screenshots one by one. Each message landed not as guilt but as proof. Proof that for the first time they couldn't manipulate me with shame. By noon, another email from Evergreen Bank arrived. "Family fund account remains frozen pending confirmation from registered owner L. Mitchell." I printed it. The paper came out, warm edges crisp. I pinned it to the refrigerator door with a small magnet shaped like a lighthouse. The image felt fitting, something that stayed standing when everything else stormed around it. Around 3, David called back. "I went through your files," he said. "You're covered on every side. Even if they attempt a civil claim, it'll collapse. No fraud, no theft, no misrepresentation." I leaned back on the couch, phone pressed to my ear. "They'll probably try intimidation next." "They might," he agreed. "If they contact you again, forward everything. Keep communication short and factual. Don't argue." "So I'm safer than you've ever been," he said simply. "Lauren, you didn't break the law. You enforced it." I smiled faintly, letting the words settle into me. After we hung up, I walked to the kitchen and stared at the printed confirmation on my fridge. Registered owner L. Mitchell. For years I'd signed documents for them, co-signed loans, managed transfers, all invisible, thankless tasks done in the name of family. Now those same signatures had become my shield. The phone chimed again. Another voicemail from Ryan, this one, sharp enough to cut glass. "You think this makes you powerful. You've humiliated Mom. Everyone knows. Fix it before you destroy what's left of this family." I replayed it once, then saved it under proof. 6 legal threats. The sun dipped low, casting soft orange light through the blinds. I sat down at my desk and opened the folder titled Operation Silence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I renamed it Frozen Justice. The word justice looked strange at first, too heavy, too official. But it fit. I wasn't playing their game anymore. I was closing the book on it. I thought about Mom's words from that recording. "She's convenient, not really family." Convenient had kept their house warm, their credit intact, their lives polished. And now that convenience had ended. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted peace that wasn't conditional. I scrolled through the saved messages one last time. The list had grown long: voicemails, texts, legal notices, even photos of handwritten notes I'd found in old envelopes. Every piece a breadcrumb leading back to the truth I hadn't betrayed them. They had betrayed the very person keeping them afloat. The heater kicked on again. I wrapped my hands around my mug, the warmth grounding me. By evening, a new message appeared. This one from Mom. The tone had shifted. "Lauren, please. The reporters are asking questions about the charity funds. We need to talk before this gets worse." I stared at the words. Reporters. So it had started already. Minutes later, Ryan texted, "If you don't fix this, we'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." I almost laughed. What I'd done was save receipts. I took a slow breath, then opened my email drafts. One of them was already waiting, the one addressed to Rachel Carter, the journalist I'd worked with years ago on a charity audit. The subject line read, "Information regarding misuse of family fund." I hovered my cursor over send, but didn't click yet. Timing again. The truth deserved the right stage. Outside, the fog had lifted entirely. The street below glowed under the amber wash of streetlights. Cars moved like slow streams of silver. I thought about the Mitchell house in Seattle, the same porch where I used to string lights while Ryan complained about the cold. Now they'd be sitting in darkness. Power cut heat gone, their credit cards failing one by one. The irony didn't feel cruel. It felt balanced. My phone buzzed one last time that night. Ryan again. "We're talking to reporters if you don't fix this." I stared at the text for a long moment, then at the open draft on my laptop. I smiled. "If they want the truth public," I murmured. Fingers resting on the keys, "I'll make sure the whole city hears it." The cursor blinked once like a quiet pulse waiting. Then I pressed save, leaned back, and let the room fill with the soft hum of silence that finally belonged to me. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived, wrapped in a soft, pale silence. Portland was still wet from the night's rain, the kind that left the air smelling like pine and cold stone. I brewed coffee and turned on the small radio by the sink. The announcer's voice drifted through the static perfect weather for gatherings across Washington. Families are getting ready for the biggest meal of the year. I looked at the clock. 9 sharp. My laptop screen glowed in the dim kitchen light. An email notification appeared at the top corner of the screen. Service termination confirmed. Mitchell residence. I took a slow sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me, and whispered, "Right on time." Some people started Thanksgiving by carving turkeys. I started mine by carving out the last piece of silence between us. By 10, my phone began to vibrate. A message from Ryan. "Power's out. Mom's freaking out. Do you know anything about this?" Another followed seconds later. "The caterer says the card was declined. They're threatening to leave." I set the phone face down on the table, watching the light blink with every new notification. Then I stirred sugar into my coffee, slow and steady, listening to the spoon ring against the mug. The rhythm was calm, almost meditative. 200 miles north, their world was cracking. At 10:30, more messages flooded in. "Guests are here. Nothing works. Mom is on the phone with the electric company. They said the account was frozen. The cards are declining, Lauren. Every single one." I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it Proof. 7. Thanksgiving. One by one, I took screenshots. Each ping sounded like punctuation. Another voicemail came through, Mom's voice trembling under the surface of control. "Lauren, whatever this is, undo it. There are 30 people here. The lights just went out again. This isn't funny." Her words cracked on that last sentence, the first sign of fear threading through authority. I saved the voicemail and labeled it Voicemail, Thanksgiving, 1, MP3. Outside my window, the city was waking up. I could hear laughter echoing from across the courtyard, the sound of pans clanging in someone's kitchen. Thanksgiving smells drifted through the air, roasted garlic, cinnamon, butter. It should have felt like nostalgia. Instead, it felt like distance. At 11, another message came, this time from Madison. What the hell did you do? The catering truck left. Guests are leaving. This isn't you, Lauren. I smiled faintly. You'd be surprised. By noon, the reports had turned frantic. The heat was off the credit line, frozen, the backup account empty. Every text was shorter, sharper. Fix it now, please. Then came the photo sent by Ryan. The Mitchell dining room, once filled with warm light, now cloaked in shadows. Candles' half-burned faces blurred by darkness. I stared at the image until the glow of the screen reflected back in my eyes, then turned the phone over and let it dim. I poured another cup of coffee and stepped onto the balcony. The sky above Portland had finally opened, streaks of sunlight cutting through gray clouds. I leaned on the railing watching the street below, families carrying pies, neighbors greeting each other with smiles. The sound of laughter drifted from the apartment next door. Far north, their house would be silent. Cold. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it until the screen went black. The silence in my apartment was perfect. I sat back at the kitchen table and opened my journal. On the next clean page, I wrote slowly, the pen gliding with measured certainty. They called it peace. Now they can have silence. They called me cold. Now they can feel winter. The words looked almost poetic under the slanted afternoon light. I thought of all the years I'd spent driving north, hands gripping the steering wheel through rain and traffic, balancing trays of desserts I'd baked at 2 a.m. I used to think I was holding the family together, that effort and kindness could patch over favoritism and neglect. But kindness had turned into currency, and they'd spent it without a second thought. Now the debt had come due. At 2:45 p.m., my phone started again, ringing, buzzing, vibrating in endless loops. I let it sit on the counter until the sound became part of the room. Eventually, curiosity won. I checked the screen. Ryan again. Did you do this then, Mom? You've humiliated us. Everyone's talking. The neighbors saw the catering truck drive off. You don't know what you've done. A final one from Madison. You've lost your mind. You'll regret this. I saved every message. My laptop screen filled with proof dates times desperation captured in pixels. I played Mom's voicemail again, not out of cruelty but clarity. Her voice shook as she said, "We're ruined, Lauren. Please make it stop." Make it stop. The same tone she'd used when she wanted me to fix bills, to handle paperwork, to clean up Ryan's mistakes. Always the same pattern, my labor, their comfort. I didn't reply. At 4, the rain returned, tapping lightly against the glass. I made myself a simple dinner, a baked potato butter melting across the top. When I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number? One text. They know it was you. I looked at the message, then at the half-eaten potato on my plate. The steam curled upward, soft and white, and I whispered, "Good." I finished my meal, slowly washing each dish afterward, the ordinary rhythm grounding me. Every motion felt deliberate. Turning off the faucet, drying my hands, stacking the plate. I'd spent years being the invisible caretaker. Tonight, I was the architect of silence. The world outside my window glowed golden as evening settled. Across the courtyard, a family gathered at their table, the kind of warmth I used to chase. I smiled faintly, not from envy but release. I turned off my lights and sat by the window, watching the city darken one building at a time. The reflection staring back at me looked calm, almost peaceful. Another voicemail came through the ringtone, cutting through the quiet. I let it play out. The sound of Ryan's voice rose above the static. "Everyone's gone. The house is freezing. Mom's crying. You win, okay? Are you happy?" Now I pressed the save button without listening further. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, swirling under the street lamp. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and whispered, "They wanted a Thanksgiving without me. Now they have one." The heater clicked off with a soft sigh. I let the quiet settle deeper, closing my eyes as the storm rolled further north. Some debts aren't paid in money. They're paid in silence on the exact day they decided you didn't belong. The morning after Thanksgiving was unnervingly still. Portland sat under a low sheet of gray clouds, the air damp, the streets quiet. I woke late, my body heavy from a rare, dreamless sleep. When I reached for my phone, the screen lit up with more notifications than I'd ever seen: texts, missed calls, news alerts. At the top was one that froze me mid-stretch: breaking news, local charity scandal, Mitchell family under review. I opened it. The headline glared in bold: Elaine Mitchell, longtime charity organizer, steps down amid allegations of financial discrepancies and mismanagement of donor funds. The article was short, clinical. The board had launched an internal audit after irregularities were reported in the family's shared accounts. The words shared accounts seemed to glow. My coffee machine beeped behind me, the sound too loud for the quiet kitchen. I poured a cup, the steam curling in front of my face as I read the story again. Karma doesn't knock, I thought. It sends a headline. By mid-morning, my messages were piling up. Old coworkers, distant relatives, even a college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Is that your family on the news? I always thought your mom was so perfect. Wow. You okay? I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a private browser and typed my family's name. Page after page appeared: articles, reposts, speculation. One photo stopped me cold. The Mitchell house, my mother's perfect suburban fortress, shrouded in darkness. Someone had taken the picture the night before, posted it online with the caption, "Thanksgiving gone wrong." The irony was brutal. The house that had once hosted glittering charity galas now looked like a tomb. I saved the image and added it to a folder labeled Proof 8 Public Fallout. A new email appeared. Rachel Carter. The name tugged at something familiar. She'd been the journalist I'd worked with years ago on a charity audit. Her message was brief. Lauren, we've received documents confirming you're the listed account holder for the Mitchell Family Fund. Would you like to comment before publication? I typed 2 words in reply: no comment. Then I added, just accuracy. An hour later, the next headline dropped: Mitchell family resignations confirmed. It mentioned the power outage, the frozen accounts, the public embarrassment during their Thanksgiving gathering. It quoted sources close to the family saying Elaine Mitchell had collapsed under stress. I set the phone down. The apartment was utterly silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. By noon, the messages shifted from curiosity to pity. From my father: your mother hasn't left her room. Are you proud of yourself? From Madison: you could have handled this privately. You've ruined everything. From Ryan: you destroyed the family name. Hope you're satisfied. I read each one, screenshotted them, and saved them under Proof 8 reactions. Outside, drizzle coated the windows, streaking the city in gray lines. I turned on the radio again. The announcer's voice sounded almost cheerful. In local news, community organizers are expressing shock after Elaine Mitchell stepped down amid a financial review. I muted it. There was no satisfaction, just a stillness that reached all the way down to my bones. In the afternoon, a new article surfaced. Anonymous source provides evidence of financial exploitation behind family fund. It didn't name me, but every detail pointed directly to my files: the screenshots, the transfers, the audit trail. Rachel had done her homework. The comments beneath the story flooded in. Sometimes silence is the loudest justice. She did what anyone would have done. Maybe families shouldn't confuse loyalty with servitude. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. I wasn't sure what I felt: vindication, maybe, or relief. I closed my laptop and sat by the window, watching the drizzle turn into proper rain. The sound was rhythmic cleansing. For the first time in years, I felt like the world was reflecting what was happening inside me. Something messy washing itself clean. In Seattle, the fallout was total. Mom's charity board released a statement thanking her for her years of service and announcing her resignation effective immediately. Ryan's bank put him on administrative leave, pending an investigation into documentation irregularities. Madison deleted all her social media accounts after people began commenting under their holiday photos. Was this before or after the lights went out? Neighbors whispered, friends vanished, invitations disappeared. And me, I was left with peace. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. A call from Rachel Carter. I let it ring once before answering. Lauren, she said, her tone professional but kind. I wanted to let you know the board confirmed your documents. Everything checks out. Do you want to be quoted by name? No, I said quietly. Just tell the truth. That's enough. She paused, her voice softening. Sometimes the truth doesn't need a voice, Lauren. It just needs proof. That line stayed with me long after the call ended. I walked to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter. Outside, the sky had darkened early, the kind of heavy dusk that comes before snow. My phone lit up again. Another article, this one from the local station. The opening line made me exhale slowly. New evidence reveals that the Mitchell Family Fund was solely managed by the eldest daughter, who had covered family expenses for years before cutting ties. The comments were kinder this time. Supportive even. Strangers defending someone they didn't know. I sat down at my desk and opened my journal. On the next page I wrote, I didn't destroy them. I just stopped saving them. The words looked small, but they felt right. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it just stopped answering calls. By early evening, the rain had slowed. I curled up on the couch with a blanket, the city lights glimmering through streaked glass. The quiet didn't ache anymore. It hummed softly, steady, alive. When my phone vibrated again, I nearly ignored it, but the screen showed a single message from Mom. We're still family. I stared at it for a long time. No accusation this time, no command. Just that one sentence floating between apology and denial. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. Instead, I whispered to the empty room, maybe we are. But family without honesty isn't love, it's dependency. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the streets shining under the streetlights. I turned off my phone and watched the water on the glass begin to dry streak by streak until the window was clear again. The week after everything fell apart was quiet in a way I hadn't known before. Portland was washed clean by rain, and the air smelled like cedar and salt. My phone stayed face down on the counter. Notifications off, no buzz, no glow. The world felt softer that way, muted. Silence used to hurt. Now it felt like oxygen. I filled my mornings with small things that didn't need permission. Coffee brewing, slow music low, the sound of rain tapping against the window. I didn't read headlines anymore. I didn't check messages. The scandal had taken on a life of its own, and I had no interest in watching it breathe. Each day I tried to stitch routine back together. I took long walks through Laurelhurst Park, watching the trees drip from the mist. I bought a paperback from a corner bookstore and read it slowly, one chapter a night. I cooked real meals again. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread, things that filled the apartment with a quiet warmth. There was peace in small acts, I realized. Peace wasn't loud. It was patient. One morning, while watering the few plants that had survived my months of neglect, I noticed a sprig of green pushing through the soil of an old clay pot I thought was dead. The fern had come back on its own, tiny and stubborn. I smiled without meaning to. Maybe that was how healing worked, quiet, unnoticed, until one day it just existed again. 3 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name and my father's careful handwriting. I took it inside and stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink slightly smudged. Your mother isn't well, it began. She's been quiet since everything happened. I won't ask you to come, but she keeps your photo on her desk again. She reads the articles over and over like she's waiting to wake up from them. The last line caught me off guard. Sometimes losing comfort is how we find truth. I read it 3 times. My eyes didn't sting and no tears came, just a hollow ache, deep and still. I set the letter on the table and made tea. The water hissed softly, and I watched the steam rise until it blurred the words on the page. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the last time I'd seen my father. He'd stood behind my mother at the lawyer's office when the will for my grandfather's estate was read. His hand had rested lightly on her shoulder, his expression unreadable. He'd never defended me, not once, but he'd also never joined the others in tearing me down. He was a man who chose silence over sides. Now his silence had turned into this, an apology written in the smallest possible way. The next morning I sat by the window with the letter beside me. My reflection in the glass looked calmer than I remembered. I thought of childhood mornings, the smell of pancakes, my mother's hands braiding my hair before school, my father whistling out of tune. Little things that felt safe back then. And then I remembered the phone call. "You're not invited to Thanksgiving." The way her voice had held no hesitation, no love. I wasn't sure what forgiveness was supposed to look like, but I knew it didn't mean pretending none of it happened. Forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was the refusal to carry their chaos any further. I wrote in my journal, forgiveness isn't for them. It's what stops their voices from living rent-free in my head. 3 days later, I opened my door to find my father standing there. He looked smaller than I remembered, his winter coat too big on him, his eyes tired. In his hands was a small wooden box. He didn't step inside, just stood in the hallway, the smell of rain still clinging to him. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he said quietly. His voice sounded like gravel, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. I took the box, the wood cool under my fingers. Inside was a silver necklace. Thin, delicate. The same one my mother used to wear every Christmas morning. I hadn't seen it in years. "She thought you might want it back," he added. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway light flickered overhead, and I could hear the faint hum of someone's television down the hall. "Tell her I got it," I said finally. He nodded once, eyes glinting, and turned to leave. No apology, no explanation. Just a father carrying the weight of something too late to fix. When the elevator doors closed behind him, I stood there a while, the box pressed against my chest. Back inside, I sat on the couch and opened it again. The necklace glimmered faintly in the soft light. I turned it over in my hand, the metal cold at first, then warming against my skin. "It doesn't erase what you did," I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to my mother or myself. "But it doesn't chain me to it either." I placed it back in the box and set it on the shelf above my desk, not as a keepsake, but as an ending. Later that evening, I opened my laptop. The folder Frozen Justice still sat on my desktop, heavy with files and screenshots and recordings. I hovered over it for a moment, then clicked. The window opened, filling the screen with months of my life condensed into digital proof. I selected all but one file, the document titled Statement of Facts, PDF. That one I kept. The rest I dragged into the trash. A small prompt appeared. "Are you sure you want to delete 87 items?" "Yes," I said aloud and pressed confirm. The sound of the trash bin emptying was quiet, final. When it was done, the desktop looked clean, almost new. Outside dusk had rolled in. I stepped onto the balcony, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. The city lights blinked on one by one, reflections shivering on wet pavement. Somewhere, a car horn sounded distant and muffled. Maybe peace wasn't something you earned. Maybe it was what was left when the noise stopped. My phone buzzed once on the table behind me. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. A text from an unknown number, I heard. "You helped us all see the truth. Thank you." I didn't recognize the sender, maybe someone from the charity board, maybe a stranger. It didn't matter. I smiled, set the phone down, and watched the rain begin again, soft, unhurried, washing the streets clean. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to be invited anywhere. I was already home. The first morning of December broke clear and pale sunlight, spilling softly across my apartment floor. I opened the window, letting the chill in, and for the first time in months, it didn't sting. It just felt new. The air smelled like frost and coffee and something cleaner, something lighter. For the first time, silence didn't echo, it breathed. I brewed a pot of coffee and stood by the window as the city slowly came alive. Portland mornings were kind like that. No rush, no noise, just motion finding its rhythm. Down on the street, a man walked his dog past the bakery, and the scent of warm bread floated up. For a long time, I had measured my days by anxiety, checking emails, refreshing headlines, bracing for something else to break. Now the only thing I refreshed was the air in my lungs. The phone stayed still on the counter. Black screen, no messages, no missed calls. I didn't need it anymore. By mid-morning, I sat at my desk reopening the spreadsheet from my freelance work, the first project I'd accepted since everything had ended. The rows and numbers felt familiar, grounding. There was a peace in small, practical things. When I finished, I sent the file, then opened my notebook and wrote one simple line. I can work without carrying their weight. Later that day, I met Evelyn for coffee, the first real catch-up I'd allowed myself. She was a former colleague, sharp and kind, the kind of woman who always saw more than she said. We sat by the window of a small cafe, the kind with handwritten menus and chipped mugs. You look lighter, she said, studying me over her cup. I smiled. Because I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. She didn't press for details. She didn't need to. Her smile was small, but knowing the kind that said she understood without asking. We talked about work, about the quiet spaces life sometimes forced us into. By the time we left, I realized something simple and startling. I hadn't mentioned my family once. Not out of avoidance, but because they no longer filled the room in my mind. On my way out, I stopped at the counter to pay. A few feet away, a young woman stood arguing softly with the cafe owner. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain something about her rent, about a payment gone wrong. The owner's tone was clipped, impatient. I have proof, she said, fumbling through her phone. He changed the locks without notice. I have emails, I swear. The man sighed, shaking his head. Look, miss, I'm sorry, but you'll have to take that up somewhere else. Something in her voice, something raw and shaking, pulled me closer. Keep those emails, I said, gently stepping in. She turned, startled. Document everything. Don't delete a thing. Screenshots, timestamps, everything. She blinked, confused. Do you work with tenants or something? I smiled faintly. No, but I've learned that silence never protects you. Paperwork does. Her eyes softened. Why are you helping me? Because someone once made me believe silence was survival, I said. It isn't. I scribbled down the number of a tenant advocacy group on a napkin and handed it to her. She thanked me twice, voice steadying. Watching her walk away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, not revenge, not relief, but purpose. That night when I got home, an email was waiting in my inbox. The subject line read, "Thank you." It was from her Anna. She wrote that the group had already agreed to take her case, that she'd finally stopped shaking when she talked about it. Her message ended simply, "You gave me back my voice." I sat in the quiet for a moment, rereading her words, then opened my journal. Justice doesn't always need revenge. Sometimes it's just passing the light to someone still in the dark. I flipped back through older pages, scanning the angry handwriting, the frantic notes, the desperate need to prove something. The later entries were different, cleaner, calmer. The letters no longer pressed into the page. My peace had a texture now. It wasn't empty, it was breathable. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in a while. Tammy, I answered. Her voice was cautious at first, then warm. Hey, Lauren, it's been a while. It has, I said softly. We talked for nearly an hour. She told me her mom, Madison, had started therapy. Ryan had moved out of Seattle trying to get his life together, as she put it. And my mother, Elaine, had joined a community support group. Tammy hesitated before saying, She talks about you. You know. Not in anger. Just quiet. I think she's trying. I listened not with bitterness, but with something like calm curiosity. Maybe that's how healing starts, I said. When the noise stops hurting. We made plans to meet for Christmas. Not in Seattle. In Portland. When the call ended, I sat in the soft light of afternoon, the city humming outside. For the first time, the word family didn't sound like a wound. It sounded like a choice. Over the next week, I began clearing my apartment. Old files, boxes, letters. I kept one photograph me at 25 standing in my mother's garden laughing at something behind the camera. My hair was messy, my smile unguarded. That version of me didn't know what was coming, but she was still mine. I framed the photo and placed it on my desk, not as nostalgia, but as a reminder of what it meant to return to yourself. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The air was cold, bright with city light. Below, people carried shopping bags bundled in scarves. I felt the hum of life moving forward, unbothered by what had fallen behind. The phone buzzed once more. This time, it didn't make my chest tighten. It was just sound neutral, ordinary. An email notification slid across the screen, holiday invitation. Community dinner, December 24. It was from the local shelter where I'd volunteered years ago. I smiled, typing a short reply. Count me in. Then I wrote in my journal, slow and steady, family isn't always where you're born. Sometimes it's where you're finally seen. I closed the notebook, took a slow breath, and watched the city settle into twilight. The weight was gone. Not forgotten, just transformed. Christmas morning arrived quietly, the kind that felt almost holy without a single sound. Portland was blanketed in a thin layer of snow, soft enough that the world seemed to breathe slower. The light through my window was pale gold, catching on the frost that framed the glass. It was the first Christmas that didn't hurt, the first one that was mine. I got out of bed, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of cocoa and pine from the tiny wreath I'd hung on the door the night before. I turned on an old jazz station, the kind that played Nat King Cole and Bing Crosby, and let the music fill the space that used to ache. No gifts waited under a tree, no family chatter echoed down the hall, but there was peace thick and steady, and I realized that was enough. I dressed slowly, choosing a simple gray sweater and wool skirt, tied my hair back, and packed a small tin of cookies. They weren't perfect, some edges too brown, some shapes uneven, but they were mine, baked in my own kitchen, with no one hovering, no one judging. I poured hot chocolate into a travel mug, tucked the tin under my arm, and stepped into the cold. Snowflakes fell lazy and light as I walked toward the community center. The streets were quiet except for the crunch beneath my boots. Families passed carrying pies and wrapped gifts, their laughter drifting into the air. For a moment, I thought about past Christmas mornings, about the long drives to Seattle, the tension masked by smiles, the feeling of walking into a house that pretended to be home. This year, I didn't pretend. The community hall glowed like a lantern at the end of the block windows, fogged with warmth. Inside, volunteers bustled between tables, arranging trays of food, pouring cider into paper cups. The air was alive with cinnamon laughter and the hum of people who had decided to care. Lauren, someone called. It was Grace, the coordinator, who had emailed the invitation weeks ago. You made it, I did, I said, smiling, as I handed her the tin. Homemade cookies. Be gentle, she laughed. You're already a hero. Half these folks didn't eat breakfast. I joined a small group setting tables, folding napkins, placing candles in jars. Across the room, children played tag between chairs, while their parents watched smiling, despite tired eyes. Every corner of the hall held life messy, unfiltered, unashamed. A woman passing by paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. You look familiar, she said. Aren't you the woman from that article I hesitated for only a breath before answering? I guess I am. But that's not my story anymore. She nodded, a hint of understanding flickering in her gaze. Good, she said softly. Then it's a new one. By afternoon, the tables were full. People from every kind of life sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing food and laughter, as if the world had never divided them. I poured cider-refilled plates, and for the first time in years felt completely present. There was no pretending, no pressure, no masks, just the simple rhythm of kindness moving from one hand to another. Then I saw Tammy. She stood near the doorway, her red scarf dusted with snow eyes, searching the room until they found mine. When they did, she smiled, shy at first, then wider. I crossed the room quickly, and she met me halfway, pulling me into a hug that caught me off guard. It wasn't heavy or desperate, just real. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," she said. "I'm glad you came," I answered. We found a quiet corner near the window where the light from the candles shimmered on the frost outside. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "Mom asked me to give you this," she said. "She didn't know if you'd read it." I took it carefully, my name written in my mother's perfect cursive. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume lavender and something older familiar. I unfolded it slowly. "I'm learning how to listen," the letter read. "I'm sorry it took losing your voice to hear my own. Merry Christmas." That was all. No excuses, no explanations. Just that. I read it twice. My throat didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I just smiled faintly, almost to myself. "She's trying," Tammy said quietly. "I know," I said. "And maybe that's enough." We sat together for a while, watching families share food, volunteers dancing awkwardly to the carols playing over the speakers. The laughter was soft and real, not the kind that hides something sharp underneath. Later, I stepped outside for air. Snow was falling again, light and endless. The letter was still in my hand, and I traced the ink with my thumb. A wind gust lifted a few flakes onto the page, and when I brushed them away, the words looked almost like they were fading, softening into the paper. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a door that swung open. Maybe it was just footsteps walking away from anger. When I turned back toward the hall, the glow of the windows looked warmer somehow. Inside, I saw Tammy helping serve dessert, her scarf slipping off one shoulder as she laughed. Back inside, a little girl tugged at my sleeve. "Can you help me with this?" she asked, holding up a tangled silver chain. I smiled when I saw it, my mother's necklace. I'd brought it in my pocket, meaning to donate it quietly. I crouched down to clasp it around her neck. "Is it yours?" she asked. "It was," I said softly. "Now it's ours." Her grin lit up the room brighter than any string of lights. The evening drifted into music. Someone played piano, and a few people sang along, off-key but joyful. I stayed near the back, watching faces glow in the candlelight, feeling something loosen inside me that had been tight for years. By the time the hall began to empty, my hands smelled like sugar and pine. I hugged Grace goodbye and thanked her for the invitation. She said, "We'll see you next year," as if there was never a question I belonged. Walking home, snow fell in slow spirals under the streetlights. My breath clouded in front of me, disappearing into the night. Back in my apartment, I lit a single candle on the windowsill and sat with a mug of cocoa, watching its flame flicker against the glass. For years, I thought home was where I was expected. Tonight, I learned it's where I am accepted. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, steady, endless. Inside, so did peace. A year later, winter came back, soft and silver. The air in Portland was cold but gentle, the kind that kissed your cheeks instead of biting them. I woke to sunlight crawling across my ceiling, bright and unfiltered. My apartment was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that pressed down on you. It felt alive, like breath. A year ago, I froze everything to survive. This morning, I just watched the sunlight thaw my windows. I stretched, padded into the kitchen, and started the coffee maker. Steam rose in thin spirals, curling toward the frost that still clung to the glass. My plants lined the windowsill now, green, thriving proof that something could die and still find its way back to life. I smiled at the sight. The laptop pinged on the counter. A new email. Invitation Financial Empowerment Panel. Women Rebuilding Their Futures. The event was scheduled for November 28th. The anniversary. I laughed quietly to myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. I read the message twice. They wanted me to speak, to share my experience, to talk about what financial independence really meant. The woman who had once been erased by her own family, now being asked to help others reclaim their voices. I typed back, yes, I'd be honored. Outside the city hummed buses groaning through wet streets, people wrapped in scarves rushing to work. I didn't feel like I was rushing anywhere. I'd spent too many years sprinting toward approval that was never waiting for me. Now the pace of my days was slower, fuller. After breakfast, I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a thin envelope sealed in dust. My handwriting curled across the front. It was a letter I'd written to my mother months ago but never sent. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. I unfolded it and read the words. I don't hate you. I just can't build peace in a place where silence is currency. For a long time, that letter had felt like the only way to end the story. But now reading it again, it felt unnecessary, like a voice that no longer needed to speak. I smiled, folded it carefully, and slid it back into the drawer. Closure didn't need witnesses. By afternoon, the clouds had rolled in low and heavy. I grabbed my keys and drove north. The highway stretched quiet and empty, lined with bare trees slick from rain. I hadn't been back to Seattle since everything ended. I didn't plan to stay long. I just wanted to see it one last time. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered. The Mitchell house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, painted a new color, now pale blue instead of white. The yard was trimmed, the windows replaced, the old mailbox gone. A different family lived there. I parked across the street but didn't get out. The world around me felt still muted under the gray sky. They had rebuilt the house. And I had rebuilt myself. I sat there a few minutes longer, watching the wind sway the trees, then started the car and drove away without looking back. By the time I returned to Portland, evening had folded over the city. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke. At the community center, laughter spilled out through open doors, people preparing for the weekly dinner I had helped organize for months now. Tammy was there stacking boxes of canned food. She waved when she saw me. Her cheeks were flushed, her scarf half untied. "You made it," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. We set up the tables together, hands brushing against each other as we passed plates and folded napkins. It was comfortable now, the way silence between us felt easy instead of tense. When the tables were done, she reached into her bag and handed me something small, an old photograph. It was my mother, sitting at a folding table, smiling faintly, surrounded by boxes labeled Food Drive. She looked older, softer. "She started volunteering again," Tammy said quietly. "Small program, nothing big. But she goes every week." I studied the photo for a long moment. My mother's hands were folded, her eyes calm. There was something peaceful about her posture. "She looks lighter," I said finally. Tammy nodded. "I think she's learning." "So am I said. Later, as the dinner wound down, we raised our paper cups in a small toast. No champagne, no speeches, just simple warmth. I looked around the room at the faces I'd grown to know, the volunteers, the families, the strangers who had become my circle. It struck me then that the word family didn't need to mean what it used to. It wasn't bound by blood. It was bound by truth. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clean. The sound of chairs scraping the floor echoed softly through the hall. When I finished, I walked outside. The night was clear, the air sharp with the first hint of frost. Back home, I turned on the lamp by the window and sat down at my desk. My journal lay open, its pages filled with the story I'd lived and survived. I picked up my pen and began to write. I once thought proof was in numbers, signatures, and frozen accounts. But peace doesn't need receipts. It just needs time. The words flowed easily now, like breathing. I glanced at the little fern on the windowsill, the same one that had died a year ago and somehow returned. Its leaves shimmered in the light. The phone rang once, breaking the silence. When I answered, a familiar voice came through. Rachel Carter. "Lauren," she said warmly, "I just wanted to tell you something. People still talk about your story, but what they remember most is how it ended with silence." I smiled. That was the loudest part. When the call ended, I sat there for a while, staring at the city beyond the glass. Lights twinkled across the river like scattered stars. Maybe peace wasn't what came after revenge. Maybe it was what grew quietly in its place. I closed the journal, resting my palm on the cover for a moment, before sliding it into the drawer. Outside snow began to fall thin and slow, painting the streets in silver. I stood by the window, watching the flakes drift down, their motion hypnotic. The candle on my sill flickered its flame, steady but alive. I thought of everyone who had tried to erase me, and how the proof of my existence had never been theirs to take. It wasn't in documents or accounts or even justice. It was here in the stillness that no longer hurt, in the life that fit me like breath. I whispered into the quiet, maybe peace isn't what you find after revenge. Maybe it's what you become when you no longer need it. For a long time, I just watched the snow. Then I turned to the camera inside my mind, to the listener I couldn't see but always felt. If you've ever been erased, I said softly, I hope you know this silence can be survival, but truth is rebirth. And when you finally stop proving your worth, that's when you start living it. The candlelight flickered once, and outside the city settled into a hush, so deep it almost sounded like peace itself. Wherever you are, tell me what peace looks like for you. And if my story found you today, stay a while, because the next one might just be yours.